Waves, episode 244.
Broadcasting from Melbourne, Australia, this is the Unshackled Waves with Tim Wills, brought to you by theunshackled.net.
Hello everyone, welcome to another live Waves episode. Back in March, the eyes of the world were on New Zealand following the Christchurch mosque shooting that killed 51 Muslims carried out by Australian white nationalist Brenton Tarrant. During the period following, New Zealand was grieving. The rest of the world fell in love with their Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, praising her as an exemplary world leader. Polls in Australia even suggested we wanted Jacinda Ardern to be our Prime Minister. But as I forewarned at the time, attempts to limit free speech and civil liberties were on their way, and that's what's on the legislative agenda in New Zealand, encouraged by a cheering mainstream media over there, desiring a crackdown on so-called extremists and their online presence. With over 2 months now passing since the massacre, with normality returning to New Zealand life and the battle to protect freedom in the nation now in motion. So to update us, we welcome back to the show tonight, editor of the Unshackled's New Zealand affiliate, Right Minds, Dewey de Boer. Welcome back.
Hello, Tim. It's good to be back on the show.
Now, a lot of things were happening when we did two shows back in late March after the massacre had happened. And one of the first things that the government immediately cracked down on was the live streaming of the massacre and Brenton Tarrant's manifesto. They're now both banned in New Zealand with heavy jail sentences threatened.
Yes, you can get up to 14 years in prison for possession of the manifesto or the video. We have a few trials ongoing with teenagers who have been charged with possession of the video, and they're still to be sentenced, I believe. One man has been convicted, but not sentenced yet, and so it has been confirmed he will be spending time in jail, but we're not sure how much.
Yeah, it's the main person is actually in custody he hasn't been sentenced yet, but facing up to 14 years. He was the initial sharer of the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he is probably at this point, I suppose, the most famous neo-Nazi in New Zealand. And we don't know much about the others other than that they're teenagers. Yeah.
And the manifesto, because obviously that was circulated widely online as well. Has anyone been charged with distributing or possessing the manifesto?
Not that I'm aware of. I suspect the ones who had the video will get linked charges related to the manifesto, but nobody's been singled out for just the manifesto, to my knowledge.
It sounds like if the initial sharer of the video is a neo-Nazi, then it's obviously that the government is looking for an excuse to try and get him off the street.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's it. It's been confirmed that he basically is going to prison, and yeah, that's probably why they picked him. It haven't gone after dozens of people, because I believe it was revealed by Facebook the number of people who shared the video was dozens or hundreds, but as far as we know, very, very few people are being charged in relation to it. But of course, it is still a crime. Anybody who was in possession of the manifesto or who watched the video is technically a criminal.
Yeah, which is pretty. Like I said previously, it's trying to delete things from history. That's very alarming to people who you can't erase what's happened, no matter how gruesome. You can't unhistory something, to use the term.
and on the internet as well, and with an international, any other country, you can get the video, you can get the manifesto and so on, and not face charges. So it's a bit weird, I suppose, that it's just in New Zealand, but the second you leave New Zealand, it would be perfectly legal to to be in possession of any of these things. So that's where this crackdown is aimed at, is to get this stuff off social media. And obviously the social media platforms don't want to host this kind of content, and I don't blame them either. And they're working pretty hard to get rid of it. But even then, they can't get rid of it. We still see news reports every other day. Well, not every other day, but I did see one last week of the video basically being on Facebook disguised in some form or another. So there's probably some kind of international game going on to try and keep this thing on these social media platforms, and even they are basically finding it impossible to get rid of.
Well, they blocked a whole heap of websites, the ISPs, in Australia, which included free speech video hosting website BitChute, which we used to upload like our videos to mirroring, but that's blocked by most ISPs. So sort of everyone's sort of stuck with YouTube or Facebook.
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise to me and many people in New Zealand that a number of websites just straight up vanished, including Zero Hedge. And obviously all the Chan sites and BitChute, like you mentioned. It was a little bit random almost, because some of the targets, like Zero Hedge, actually did not host any of the footage or host any of the files or anything related to it, and they still got banned basically. All of that has been undone now, I believe. But that is a bit of a worrying sign that ISPs will simply ban a whole bunch of websites, including ones that are not attached to the not involved in the activities that they're trying to ban.
Now, an article that you published on Right Minds, which we republished on the Unshackled, that spread everywhere, was that the Islamic call to prayer would be played on the 1 week anniversary of the Christchurch massacre. And then there's the famous image of Jacinda Ardern doring hijab, and this really got a lot of people riled up, because just because Muslims are the victims here doesn't mean that, and we've spoken about this before, we should just disregard the problems that Islamization brings. And when your parliament resumed, there was a Islamic prayer, even though they've removed references to Christianity from the parliamentary prayer. And I read an article today. It was on Stuff, which is one of your local news website, about the Christian community there, sort of saying, hang on, I think Islam is taking advantage of the outpouring of sympathy and trying to sort of gain more legitimacy as a religion in New Zealand. Do you share that belief?
Yes, to an extent. I believe the backlash from Christians is ongoing, and probably is something that will be felt to a certain extent. We'll see what effect it will have. Obviously, a lot of the or maybe interestingly to your audience, a lot of the Christian community in New Zealand is Pacific Islanders and so on, and they are mostly Labour voters. So a lot of Labour's audience is actually more conservative Christian people, and there seems to be a lot of disaffection with a lot of the things that this government is doing, and all of these things are adding up. And the removal of Jesus from the parliamentary prayer was widely criticized by Christians, and the reason that was given was they didn't want to give any one religion preference in New Zealand. But obviously they backed down on that by saying, well, in these circumstances we're giving other religions preferences. And what's in the prayer was probably the most insulting to Christians anyway. Obviously the main content of the prayer is to say that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, which is that's the essence of the Islamic faith. That's what you basically, if you want to convert to Islam, that's what you need to say. And so most Christians saw it for what it is, which is, well, this is actually kind of a soft conversion to Islam, basically.
There was also the typical secular crowd in Australia who try to use Christchurch to get rid of the prayer in Parliament in Australia, but to no avail, because Australia, the Christian community still does have a lot of political influence. That's sort of Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, he's a evangelical. After Christchurch, he sort of remade himself as a Prime Minister for all religions, that he was going to treat all religions equally, whether it be Christians or Jews or Muslims, and he went to Islamic mosques after the Christchurch massacre. So there's sort of like in Australia being Islam is sort of it's become on par with Christianity now, and I think that sort of, as I said, it's been set from the top from Scott Morrison, that religious freedom in Australia means everyone.
Yeah, and that's a sense that people have in New Zealand as well. But I think the overarching emphasis on Islamic symbolism in New Zealand has unsettled many Christians and atheists as well, I think, to a certain degree. I mean, New Zealand has been for a long time, or since the beginning, a Christian country. It's no longer majority Christian, but so that's sort of, I suppose, what we're seeing is a bit of a shift and some unsettlement happening around that, and I can't. Yeah, it's hard to tell where that will go. There have been a lot of rumours and talk about starting a new Christian party in New Zealand. That's kind of culminated in at least one sort of more fringe group, perhaps more so in the Maori community, have sort of started up a new sort of coalition party, and they're going to be having a crack at some of Labour's seats and in next year's election. So we are seeing some of the fallout from all of Labour's policies, not just the selection of the Islamic prayer and so on.
There's also the new Conservative Party, which you've been quite supportive of. You had the leader, Elliot Mettle, on your podcast. Ikele, yeah, sorry. And I interviewed him when I was over in New Zealand, and so they're not seen as the answer?
I think they struggle a bit to get the popularity and the airtime. So yeah, in a sense they're low profile. They're not very well known, not very well funded. This other group that I mentioned is associated with a group called the Destiny Church, and Australians won't really know who this is, but he's basically, I don't know if you have any kind of, I've got to tread carefully here, sort of a very large sort of mega church led by a sort of a cult personality, without using the word cult too heavily, but he's sort of known as a very influential person, and he's got a big following of at least in the thousands. And so his wife is the one who's leading this new political force, and they tend to be able to command a lot of media attention. Like the media loves to give them attention. And in New Zealand, the media is basically one cohesive group, so we don't really have something like you have Sky News in Australia, which is considered to be a little bit more conservative leaning. We don't have any kind of media that's not like hardcore left-wing in New Zealand, so that makes it really hard for groups like the New Conservatives to break through, because they've got no one who's really willing to give them attention, and they don't have the money or command the personalities to just sort of smash through all of that.
It sounds like another reason why the left in Australia want to move to New Zealand. No News Corp, Rupert Murdoch. I mean, they'd be in heaven.
Yeah. We I don't want to say we need a Rupert Murdoch in New Zealand, but we do need a Rupert Murdoch in New Zealand. I think it would be great to see somebody pour a bunch of money into setting up at least a slightly conservative leaning, more openly. I'll say more balanced, but at least something that's a little bit more open about its biases in New Zealand, because the entire media in New Zealand basically leans heavily to the left, but they just pretend to be, fair and balanced.
So if any New Zealand investor is wanting to bankroll conservative media in New Zealand, we've got who I think is the man to do it on the show.
Well, thank you. We actually do have a lot of a lot of sort of conservative and classical liberal content creators coming in New Zealand now. So there is a bit of a group of a ragtag group of rebels coming together and on various blogs and so on. So there is some sort of alt media happening, but there's definitely nothing in terms of, and there's no mainstream group that's really challenging the media narrative, which would be, I think, quite interesting and quite positive for New Zealand if we did have that.
Now, one of the things that Jacinda Ardern promised first up after the massacre happened is that New Zealand's gun laws would change and pretty much bring them into line with Australia's gun laws. Now, during the gun buyback in Australia, there was a lot of anger from gun owners, and there was the infamous speech that John Howard gave with a bulletproof vest, which he later said he regretted. But the gun owners, they eventually, gave back their guns. But in New Zealand, it's been a lot more aggressive. The government's coming in with their guns to take people's guns by force, which when I heard about this, I was, that's shocking.
Yeah, it's so it's been reported that in the last 2 months since they instituted the ban, around about 500 guns have been handed in, and less than 3,000 notices have been filed, which is like 0.01% of the semi-automatics in New Zealand. The police are not capable of taking them at the moment, so they actually lost 11 of them, were stolen from a Palmerston North police station earlier this month. And it's been revealed that the police actually bought them back from criminals. Well, we laugh, but we shouldn't. So somebody walked into a police station and stole a bunch of guns and so on. And so people don't trust the trust between firearms owners and the police is at an all-time low and sinking further as time goes on. And the media, the government, same thing. They haven't revealed any information about the buyback program. So they initially threw around numbers like 100 million to 200 million. The numbers have been going up: 500 million, 1 billion, 1.5 billion, and there are even higher numbers floating around. But that's, if they were to pay market value, that's the kind of money they would need. And there's just been no information about that. And I suspect that, like in Australia, they're heading for quite a low compliance rate. In Australia, it was estimated to be, I believe, in the 30%, 35%. They could get a lot higher here in New Zealand if they didn't mess it up, but it looks like they really do want to mess it up, so it's hard to tell. It's a huge mess, and they are obviously raiding people. There was a few high-profile ones, so they raided the man who dug the mass graves for the Christchurch mosque victims. He dug all 50 graves for the funerals, and then a week later the police raided his home. They pointed guns at his children, and they went through all of his stuff. They took his AR-15. They left him with his firearms license. They left him with all of his other firearms, because obviously he hadn't broken any laws. But yeah, he had an entire squad of police officers raid through his house and point guns at his children. And then there have been a few other people who have been raided as well, and a lot of people being questioned by the police. So people have armed police turning up on their doorsteps at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, telling them they need to ask them questions. And the questions involve questions like, what do you think of Donald Trump?
Yeah, there's
what is your
video
religious,
that went viral.
Yeah, that video. So like, what is your religious affiliation? What do you think of Jacinda Ardern? And those are the kinds of questions that are being asked. So yeah, it hasn't really slowed down either. When it first happened, I thought, oh well, they'll back off, right? This will look really bad, and they'll stop doing these silly things, because this will just drive a wedge and continue to create distrust and continue to create anger and resentment. But they haven't taken their foot off the pedal yet, so we'll see where it ends up.
Yeah, they're certainly, this seems to be the next stage of the state's crackdown. We talked about in the beginning the video and the manifesto, and now it's the guns, which the authorities are coming down hard. And yeah, it's like, we often complain about police state in Australia, but in New Zealand it seems to be sort of a lot more jackbooted, even though it has got a friendly face in Jacinta.
Yes, and even a friendly face in the police. Often the people I've talked to and who have seen these police officers have been like, "Ah, the police officers themselves seem to be really nice and are kind of like, we're just doing, we're just doing our job, or just, we don't really have anything against you," and they seem, people seem to be treated nicely. So it's like the police are raiding your house, at least they're smiling at you and saying, please and thank you.
Very considerate. We've just got a super chat on the stream from Port Film Co-op, who says, "Are world elites buying land in New Zealand to move there?"
Yeah, that's another thing that's ongoing, and has been reported on over the last few years, actually. But we do have a lot of American billionaires buying up farms on the South Island, building bunkers, and stockpiling resources for the apocalypse. So, if you are a billionaire looking to escape the coming Armageddon, you can, there's plenty of land in New Zealand for sale.
And if anyone else wants to ask a question during the live show, they've got to send through a super chat. That's how you get to participate in the show. Though I do monitor the live chat just to see what's happening. Now, obviously, the next stage is going to be the free speech crackdown, and this is it's become a global phenomenon, especially about social media, needing to crack down on hate speech and extremism. But obviously, there's been a lot of focus on so-called, white supremacists and neo-Nazis in New Zealand, and one of your media outlets, News Hub, they had a three-part series called "Because It Matters" by a reporter, Patrick Gower, trying to uncover the white supremacists and neo-Nazis in New Zealand. And I watched it in preparation for today, and it was quite funny. It's like presenting it as like trigger warning, this might be distressing, but this is important. And
Yeah, you've done better than I have, because I didn't actually watch it. I watched a couple of the clips, and I read a few of the articles, but basically it was hyped up as being the expose of the undercurrent of white supremacy in New Zealand, and about how white supremacists are basically running around New Zealand everywhere. They found that they found one neo-Nazi, who's the guy who's currently on his way to prison. They gave a tutorial on how to use 4chan, and the number that they've given of people who they reckon have sort of white supremacist views in New Zealand is 200 max. So that's as 0.0001% of the population, or less. Probably a lot less than that, actually. I'm not doing maths live on air. Sorry about that. But basically, it was a big nothing burger, and the gist of it seemed to be that he wanted to have a rematch with Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux, who visited New Zealand about a year ago. And they went to Australia as well, I believe. Their show in New Zealand was cancelled in the end, but they did have an interview with him, and they sort of steamrolled him, and because he tried to challenge them, he wasn't really there to interview them, and he seemed to be emotionally damaged from that encounter, and now apparently the reason he lost is just basically because they're white supremacists. So he did his whole series just so that he could slander them as white supremacists, and feel better about himself.
And there's Patrick Gower. He reminds me of a reporter we have in Australia on the ABC, Alex Mann. He last year exposed alt-right people who joined our National Party. And this was a huge scandal, and they ended up getting expelled. But this reporter, Alex Mann, he thinks this is his calling in journalism to expose the far right in Australia, and he's done like a few follow-ups, especially after Christchurch, and he's got this obsession now, it seems, and it seems like this Patrick Gower in New Zealand, he's got this same fixation on the far right in New Zealand. Did he try to contact you at all for this story?
Yes, he did. I got an email along with 3 other conservatives to say that they wanted to talk about the right wing and the new conservative kind of movement in New Zealand after March 15th, and nobody responded to him except, well, I did, to say no, thank you very much. I'm you're probably just going to slander me and want to talk about neo-Nazis and white supremacists and so on. And they came back to me and said, oh, how dare you insinuate that we try and set you up and do something nasty to you? Obviously, this was like 2 weeks after Avi Yemeni had his interview with
Jim Jeffries.
Jim Jeffries. And so I had seen that video, and I was thinking, oh, this sounds like a setup. And then sure enough, I was waiting for it to see what they would come out with, and indeed it was just a show about neo-Nazis. And but they didn't really try and go after anybody else, I think, because everybody who was conservative libertarian in New Zealand just basically told them to go away and didn't want to talk to them, which is a very smart thing to do, because all they're after is to try and make more white supremacists.
And that's why he spent all that time on, 8chan, and he's like looking at all these groups. Look how shocking this is. It's like he was falling off his chair. It was quite humorous just to see how triggered he was by the internet. But at least he didn't say that 8chan should be banned, because it wouldn't work.
No, it's hard to tell what they wanted out of this, because it does. He did complain that basically there were no hate crimes in New Zealand. So his policy outcome that he wants is to have hate crimes in New Zealand, and there's a few other people going after it too. They want new hate speech laws and new other laws, basically, to make it a hate crime where you'll now go to prison if you say the wrong thing about Islam, or if you say that there are only two genders or anything like that, then you can go off to prison. And that seems to be what he wants, and his we have people in Parliament who want that as well.
Yeah, there's been no concrete legislation proposed at the moment, but there's certainly a lot of people in Labour and the Greens are talking about hate speech, hate crime laws, and it seems to be that we expect it from Labour and the Greens, but the National Party over in New Zealand, which is the equivalent of our Liberal Party, they've sort of been the Me Too opposition. Mm-hmm. And it's like this is sort of the Christchurch massacre is, to use another Australian term, is her Tampa movement, but it's in reverse, because she wasn't doing very well in the polls. It was a rocky government, her and Winston Peters, but this has flipped the polls right around, and now the National Party under Simon Bridges is just playing catch up, saying, yes, this massacre is terrible. Yes, we'll just support whatever Jacinda Ardern proposes.
They just signed on with the firearms legislation straight away. When the talk of hate speech came up, the National Party said, we don't really think there need to be any changes, but we want to have this debate and this discussion, and we'll see what they come up with, and so on. Not really giving any defense. A few national MPs have actually come out and criticized the one MP from the Libertarian ACT Party who actually has come up in defense of free speech. He was the one who voted against the firearms legislation as well. And so our opposition in the last 2 months has been reduced to one man, basically.
Yeah, David Seymour, as I call him, the last man standing. We've just got another super chat from Regats Hong Kong, reject Ardern and their EU masters. Here.
Yeah.
Well, I think a masters of the UNs.
Yeah. Well, I can. You mentioned the polls and Jacinda doing the polls. She wasn't doing. Sure, she was doing pretty good in the polls. The polls have basically been pointing at the potential next government being just a Labour Green coalition. It's the current coalition partner, New Zealand First, that has been doing incredibly badly in the polls, and they continue to do badly, I think. But yeah, Jacinda has gotten a bit of a boost, and National's taken a hit, and I think they will continue to take a hit, more hits throughout the next polls in the next months, because they have not stood up. And so it's like, well, what's the point of voting for them if you're going to get the same thing from the current government?
Yeah, exactly. Now, going back to David Seymour, he's from the Libertarian ACT Party. They've just got the one seat, which has always been gifted to them by the National Party because they think they'll be able to rely on them for confidence and supply, and they did for the 9 years of the key English government. Now, when I was over in New Zealand covering the election, there was a lot of chatter that ACT, because it was a powerful force in the 90s, but it become a bit of a cucky libertarian party. David Seymour was trying to sort of woo sort of the millennial voter, like he went on Dancing with the Stars. It was all a bit cringe, but this seems to have really got him like into his element. He's like he's really standing up saying, I'm going to defend freedom no matter what. He's the only one there with a spine, and you wrote about that today on Right Minds.
Yes, the ACT Party, back when it was a sort of an economic party about economic reforms and free markets and so on, it got about 7% of the vote. It fell apart with internal strife, and they switched tact in recent years to try and go after like a purely libertarian vote, because it wasn't really in a sense, it wasn't a libertarian party in a social sense, just in an economic sense. But they've gone more after these libertarian, and not even like full-blown libertarian, I call them more left libertarian social policies. So if basically, if you've just got libertarians, you've got a small voter base. If you've got just lefty-leaning libertarians, you've got an even smaller voting base. And the attempt to try and expand that out to millennials hasn't really worked, because they get the same social policies from the Green Party and so on. So that but where it really has come back now is. And I should give the credit to Stephen Berry, who's one of the members of the ACT Party, and I believe he was in the top 10 on the list last election.
He's one of my Facebook friends. His analysis is always excellent.
And he's very good, and he is a libertarian and a solid guy. But he was the one who came to me last year during the initial thing when free speech became a hot topic in New Zealand, with Lawrence Southern and Stefan Molyneux being here. He was actually the one who came out and said, "Hey, I'll speak at your rally. I'll come and stand up for free speech." And the ACT Party leadership, including David Seymour, didn't think it was really a winning topic at the time. Like you said, they'd kind of left it. But Stephen Berry kept at it, and finally David Seymour himself has picked it up, and so he has really gone, really going hard for freedom of speech at the moment. He's taking on, multiple different MPs from all of the different parties in Parliament. He's even taking on one of the top National Party MPs in debates about free speech, and doing incredibly well. So he, like you said, he's just sort of found his found the issues that where he really feels at home. And I think that he's really struggled to sell a lot of the other messages that he's gone after in the last 6 or so years. But he's finally got his core issues where he's giving a really believable message, and that could and they will definitely be hoping that translates into a lot more votes at the next election.
And he's been accused of inciting violence against a Greens MP who is really pushing these hate speech laws. I'll pronounce the name right. Golriz Ghahraman.
So Golriz Ghahraman has been the number one MP to call for hate speech legislation, and she's been doing it since the election in 2017. And now she's got backing from Jacinda Ardern and from the Justice Minister Andrew Little as well, and even from elements of the National Party to say, we should do a review of New Zealand's speech legislation, see if we need to criminalise certain speech, and see if we need penalties, see if we need to add in protections for various different classes into the Bill of Rights Act. And so Golriz has been the one to really go after, saying all these people are being nasty to me, and she really wants hate crime legislation. And so David Seymour called her a menace to freedom, He said she's a menace to freedom in this country, and that's where she basically said that she was being harassed by him, and that she accused him of basically saying, oh, that's like almost like inciting violence against me, and she's received extra police protection after that. So she, other than only the Prime Minister and Golriz Kahraman have extra police protection in Parliament, like I said, one of the leading national MPs, and even a contender to replace the current national leader Simon Bridges. Her name is Judith Collins, and she actually came to Golriz's defence and said that David Seymour's comments were dehumanising. So to call somebody a menace to free speech is dehumanising. And then in this hilarious interview, she went on to say that he should go easy on her because she's just a kid, and she's 38 years old.
Let's put a face to this, Shane. Oops, wrong one here. No, it's not going to work. Yeah. Anyway.
And yeah, so there have been a bunch of very good interviews with David Seymour recently, taking on various other Labour MPs as well, and just exposing them for the hypocrites that they are, and pointing out that they can't actually define what hate speech is. Because you'll say to them, okay, well, give me an example of hate speech. What's hate speech? Is this hate speech? Is that hate speech? And they can never actually give an answer.
I've got it up now. There she is there. So for our Australian viewers, I think she's pretty much the New Zealand version of Sarah Hanson-Young. I mean, to have your feelings hurt that easily, to be that triggered and be a snowflake. That takes well, she does look young there, but you said she's 38. Are you also meant to be nice to her because I read that she was a child refugee, so we're supposed to
her refugee credentials are not as good as some people make them out to be. Her parents left Iran after the revolution, and they checked out a couple of different countries and ended up picking New Zealand after stopping at about at least 2 or 3 different other countries, including Australia. So they're not exactly refugees in the sense that they didn't have anywhere to go. They specifically picked New Zealand to move to.
Yeah, that's a common story among sort of refugees that come to the West.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jacinda Ardern, she's also been on the global stage wanting a global social media crackdown, and she got to go to Paris to meet with the executives of Twitter, Microsoft, and she got to meet Emmanuel Macron and Theresa May, where it was going to be this global thing, but obviously Donald Trump stood her up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, which is positive to see, and I'm not really sure what they achieved. It was called the Christchurch Call. They wanted Facebooks to eliminate quote-unquote extremism or extremist content. I still have no idea what that's supposed to include, but you can imagine it includes anything that they don't like. The changes that Facebook and other social media platforms have made since the live stream is something they would have made anyway. And they had already announced these changes before she decided to have this meeting. So it was kind of an opportunity to stand on the global stage and say that they were doing something. I'm not really sure how well it's going to go down in New Zealand. We'll see if there's much fallout there, because I'm hearing from quite a few people that, especially as she gets more internationally popular, a little bit more like, what's happened to Emmanuel Macron, and what's also happened to Trudeau in Canada, is that the more popular they've gotten overseas, the less popular that they've gotten at home.
It's almost like the Jacinda Ardern prime ministership. She's been elevated to royalty status, as it was made such a big deal when she was pregnant while in office and gave birth. It was like it was a royal baby, and now her partner is popped the question, and there's going to be a prime ministerial wedding. So
essentially going to have our very own royal wedding coming up, maybe before the election. You never know. She has been referred to as the Women's Weekly Prime Minister, and that's sort of she's been on the covers of all of these glamour magazines and so on. And there are some questions around whether or not the glamour is wearing off, because what they're actually delivering seems to be not very much. There are a lot of strikes going on in different industries. There's a lot of grumbling in different corners of the different electorates as to whether anything of substance is actually being delivered.
And in Australia, there's that mural of Jacinda Ardern hugging that Muslim when she was wearing a hijab that's been unveiled in Melbourne. And I mentioned in the introduction the polls that said, oh, we want Jacinda Ardern to be our Prime Minister. And that's probably why all the lefties with our federal election, they're all triggered over Scott Morrison having an upset win, that they now all want to move to New Zealand because they think it's such a wonderful place with such an enlightened leader, Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah. Well, they can think New Zealand is enlightened, but it's a whole lot more expensive to live. A lot of Kiwis move to Australia for the higher wages and the lower cost of living. So, I don't think any of them will actually do it. A few of them might, I suppose. I think you got the same effect going on in Australia there, where the media fawning over her, saying, "Oh yes, we want her to come and be our prime minister," probably helped Scott Morrison to a small degree. So you may have to thank us for giving you, Scott Morrison as his ongoing premiership. Might just be due to the New Zealand electorate electing Jacinda.
Maybe. I mean, Bill Shorten, the opposition leader, he was certainly no glamour candidate. I mean, I could be really unkind to describe Bill Shorten's appearance and presentation quality, but yeah, it's looking on reflection now, everyone's just like, yeah, there was no way the Australian people were going to elect him as Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm. And that overall likability is going to have a lot to do with it in any election, and that's where I think New Zealand doesn't really have an alternative to Jacinda at the moment, because a lot of the election is really a popularity contest, and the National Party leader currently, Simon Bridges, is polling at around 6%, 7% as the preferred Prime Minister. So nobody actually wants him to be Prime Minister, including his own. Including the people who vote for his party. So I suspect he's got the same issue as Bill Shorten has. So Scott Morrison's victory in Australia doesn't really bode well for us here in New Zealand, as a reverse, simply because there isn't an alternative to Jacinda unless she becomes really unpopular in the next year.
Now, obviously, the Christchurch massacre has dominated the international news about what's going on in New Zealand. The governing of the country day to day has gone on. Now, one story that was in the news just recently was that there's quite a large Chinese Communist Party influence in New Zealand. Now, it's something that's been in the public debate in Australia. There's been a lot of concern about MPs getting too close to Chinese business people with links to Beijing, and the intelligence agencies warning MPs, be aware of, Chinese influence. But in New Zealand, it just seems to be they've just let the Chinese influence come in. Nobody's asking questions or anything.
No, nobody's asking questions because both the National Party and the Labour Party both have an MP who have been former, I suspect, or they claim to be former members of the Chinese Communist Party. So the current the chair of the Justice Committee in New Zealand that's overseeing electoral interference was a member of the Chinese Communist Party. He has actually, I believe, stood down from that committee, or at least some of his duties, because there was a bit of a scandal where he blocked one academic who was critical of Chinese influence in New Zealand, Anne-Marie Brady, I believe, yes.
Yeah, she was on an episode of Four Corners in Australia. I remember her office was broken into. Yeah, she was intimidated quite severely.
Yeah, and so I believe she will be speaking to Parliament at some point in the future. And then in the so that was so that's a Labour Party MP who has come from China and been a member of the Communist Party. The National Party has an MP in a similar vein who was a member of the Chinese Communist Party, and not only that, but he was a member of he was an officer in the People's Liberation Army, and he trained Chinese spies. He taught them English, and he moved to New Zealand and became an MP in the National Party. And that was revealed before the election last year, and there was virtually no fallout from that whatsoever. And he's continues to be a member of the National Party, even though he was a Chinese communist Chinese intelligence officer.
Wow.
It's bizarre, right? You
Yeah.
think something like that would disqualify you from sitting in the New Zealand Parliament, but it doesn't at all. There was a scandal where a national MP had. He's still in Parliament. He's become an independent, but he left the National Party, and he revealed that several Chinese donors, or at least one Chinese donor, put together was offering to put together $100,000 to donate to the National Party in return for another Chinese MP. And actually, his top candidate is currently being trained at the National Party. They sort of have a training group for MPs, like up-and-coming MPs, and his candidate that he wanted is actually being trained to be a national MP. And that's so there's several Chinese societies, even a Chinese New Zealand Council, and they work with MPs from the National and Labour parties. They work with local government officials. You can see photos on the internet of all of these people all standing together, shaking hands, smiling, and so on. And they basically have, this organization. These organizations are associated openly with the Chinese Communist Party in China, and they're making massive donations to both of New Zealand's political parties. We've obviously signed up with the Silk Road as well. I believe Australia declined that. I think we're the first first Five Eyes nation, the only Five Eyes nation to sign up to the Silk Road, something road.
Yeah, One Belt, One Road.
That's right, the One Belt, One Road. You're kind of like the new Silk Road. That's why that was sticking in my head. And so New Zealand signed up to that. And there have even been cases, when I was looking into this, I found that it may be several decades ago now. I can't remember the year, but we actually had a Chinese ambassador visit New Zealand, and the protest was actually forbidden. So any permits to protest and so were denied, and the Chinese people in New Zealand who fled communism were actually not allowed to protest the Chinese ambassador or the I believe one of the presidential cabinet members or something like that. Quite a high-ranking official came to New Zealand, and there were no protests allowed at all against these visits.
Yeah, that's insane. And the fact
but nobody knows about this. When I tell people, they're shocked, and I was shocked when I found out. And nobody in the media will ever talk about it. It's quite easy to find. It's all the information is out there, but there's nobody who talks about it. So it's not like there's a giant conspiracy that's ongoing and nobody knows about it. All of this information is just openly accessible. And there is in particular a economist. I suppose I might as well mention his name if people want to find out more about this. Sorry about this.
Yeah.
His name is Michael Riddell, and he's got a blog called Croaking Cassandra. So Croaking Cassandra by Michael Riddell, and he's an economist. So he's quite a he had held quite a high position in the Reserve Bank, I believe, and he's quite a knowledgeable person, and he blogs a lot about economics in New Zealand and Chinese influence in New Zealand. And of course, you should follow what Anne-Marie Brady is doing as well. And she speaks, obviously, she's basically the only academic in New Zealand who speaks out against this Chinese influence, communist influence in New Zealand.
Oh, we've just got another super chat from Google is Evil. Thanks for your hard work, Tim. Thank you. That's much appreciated.
Thank you as well, Tim.
And going on this, now Jacinda Ardern, she's had a few problems implementing her agenda. There was a teacher strike recently. Can you give some detail on that?
Yes, there have been a number of strikes, especially the teachers. They just had one today with 65,000 teachers striking across New Zealand.
Wow.
So that's basically all of the public school teachers. And they're striking pay and working conditions because I don't know what the situation in Australia is with regards to education, but New Zealand has all of the teachers on a single pay scale, basically, based on experience, and they have limited resources for schools, and the funding is done not in like a lump sum, but they get funding that has to be allocated to specific activities in schools. And so, yeah, teachers' wages have been fairly stagnant. There's no ability for better teachers to be paid more. It's basically impossible to fire bad teachers. And with sort of the declining families, the declining social structure in New Zealand, teachers feel like they've basically had to take on parenting children. So these public school teachers just feel like they're parents to children in New Zealand. And so they're striking basically for both pay and conditions. And I think the conditions are probably worse. But I don't think this is something the government can fix. This is where they're in big trouble, because the social fabric is unraveling, and they were the ones left, they're the ones left holding the bag, or they're the ones left standing up when everyone else is sitting down on the chairs when the music stopped playing. Because this is not really something that more money can fix. It is just due to the total breakdown of the social fabric in New Zealand, the continued assault on families, single parent families, high divorce rates. I believe over 50% of children in New Zealand are born out of wedlock. A high proportion of those are just single parent families, and the public school system and the teachers just cannot deal with it anymore.
Yeah, it's happening all over the Western world. Teachers are expected to be parents. It's what the state is aiming to do, basically, take over the role of the parents, and the poor teachers are burdened with it. And there's also a budget coming up in New Zealand. Now, obviously, when National Party were in power, they got the budget back in surplus. Obviously, it's with Labour left-wing governments all around the world, they tend to bring them into deficit. What's been Labour's handling of the finances over there?
I still have to see the full details of the budget, which is officially to be released on Friday. And there's been a big leak and scandal and all kinds of stuff ongoing that I can't really talk about because I don't actually know what's going on. And there may even be some investigations going on as to what's happened there. But this is called a well-being budget. And they sort of signaled that there's going to be, they're going to be spending a lot more money. The opposition accuse them of having an $11 billion hole in the budget. The one thing they really have announced is that they're basically increasing the amount of money they can borrow by $15 billion. I think after 2021, so in the next 2 years. So there is a $15 billion hole in the budget, and the government will be borrowing more money. So that's at least the extent of the finances. The National Party was in government for 9 years, and they only managed to bring New Zealand into surplus in the last year. So the previous Labour government ended with huge debts, and the national government sort of continued to shrink those slowly over time. And so, on the whole, neither party really has a good track record of paying down debt or running balanced budgets at all. It's possible that this year's budget is still going to be sort of balanced, but the blowout happens down the road. So they basically spend money ahead of time.
Oh yeah, that old trick.
So they just they push it forward, and they try and push it forward like within 3 years. So even if they lose the election, then the next person's left holding a giant hole in the budget. And then usually they're not so. Especially the National Party is not so keen on patching those holes, because then people will get angry that their money's being taken away and so on. So it goes around in circles in New Zealand, But basically they will be spending lots more money. But I'm afraid I don't have the details on what they're going to be spending that money on yet.
In Australia, we've The coalition's just delivered the first budget surplus in over a decade, and it's funny they copied the New Zealand National Party budget promotion with the back in black graphic,
Yes.
and I think that was obviously the fact that we'd finally achieved a budget surplus was a factor in the election. That we want to achieve this budget surplus. We don't want to put Labor back in to just blow it again.
Yeah. Sadly, what our National Party did was kind of bad. Before the election, they said, here's a tax cut that will take effect at the next budget. So you have to vote for us to get your tax cut. And obviously people didn't vote for them. Labor got in and cancelled their tax cut. And so it was a bit like that with the budget as well. Like, oh yeah, we get the budget into surplus, but you got to keep voting for us to get it, to do it properly. And they basically just pushed it along too far, and people stop believing it if you keep saying that for 9 years.
And now the next New Zealand election is due around about September, October 2020. We talked a bit about the polls. Obviously, it's a long way away, but you're thinking it's going to be Labor Greens government elected after that.
At this point, it's a Labor Greens government, and almost every single poll since the last election has pointed to a Labor Greens government. But things can change very, very rapidly, because this far out of the previous election, the National Party was polling at nearly above 50%, which would allow them to govern alone, which is completely unheard of under our electoral system of MMP. But John Key resigned, and the Labour Party picked up Jacinda Ardern. So it's a really long time, and there are so many things that could happen.
I have the National Party, if they got a Jacinda up their sleeve, they can...
Yeah, well, that's basically the question, right? Yeah, it doesn't look like it at this point, but it didn't look like the Labour Party had a Jacinda up their sleeves a year and a half before the election either. So.
Well, it's been great to catch up, Dua. Right Minds has been in the thick of it, been very active, and you've also launched a Right Minds podcast.
Yes, we have. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, Right Minds NZ. You can go to the website, rightminds.nz, to see the podcast, which is available there at rightminds.nz/podcast, to see the latest episodes, and you can add it to your podcast readers and so on. And of course, everything's up on the YouTube channel. And hopefully we'll have a lot more content in months and years to go. And there should be, some new articles and commentary up on the website every week.
Yeah, I look forward to it. A few more super chats here. Another one from Regats. Have you heard about the new New Zealand Party? Does that ring a bell?
Yes, I have heard of the new New Zealand Party. So there is a former rugby boss, and I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. Sorry, it's escaped me. That's really bad. I should know it. I think, again, the problem there is they've got someone who would be high profile. He's got a Twitter presence, I believe, and that's kind of my problem, is I'm not really on Twitter. I just never enjoyed Twitter. But there hasn't been any noise about that outside of sort of the smaller circles that are on the some of the right-wing social media circles have been talking about it, but beyond that there hasn't been any noise. And I think that's a problem that a lot of these startup groups will have, is that getting your name out there and getting a large presence and getting a large following and getting funding and getting name recognition is actually very, very hard in New Zealand.
And Port Film Co-op has put through another super chat. Do they have good organic and biodynamic milk in New Zealand?
I wouldn't know, sorry.
Yeah, that was a bit of a random one.
Is it? We do. New Zealand is famous for its milk, so we're supposed to have the best milk in the world. So my best guess is that yes, we should. But milk is very, very expensive in New Zealand, like everything else. Far more expensive than Australia. So if you do want to come to New Zealand for the milk, just be prepared to pay a lot more money for it.
Yeah, that's why there's all this concern about white supremacy. There's so much milk in New Zealand. Well, like I said, thanks again for getting us all up to speed about what's been happening in New Zealand. There's obviously still a lot to come, and we'll keep an eye on freedom in New Zealand, because what happens there, especially with Jacinda Ardern, a global name, it's going to have ripple effects overseas and here in Australia.
And thank you very much for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the show for today, everyone. As I keep mentioning on the show, I'm currently banned from Facebook, so make sure that you follow The Unshackled on free speech social media, on Gab, on Minds, on MeWe, and also, as I say at the end of every show, we can't do this without your support, so please become a patron of The Unshackled at patreon.com/TheUnshackled, or go to paypal.me/TheUnshackled, or become a premium member on our website. And all your super chats tonight have been much appreciated, so if you want to send a few more dollars through those methods, it'd be much appreciated. So thanks once again for your company, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Unshackled Waves. Please visit theunshackledwaves.net for all the ways to subscribe and follow the show. Don't forget to pick up your free ebook at theunshackledbattlefield.net, and keep checking out theunshackled.net for all the latest news and commentary.